Fresno is one of 23 campuses in the CSU, and we're very fortunate to be part of the early adopters of various campuses who decided that Ally was going to be a really fantastic tool for our institution. So we're going to walk through some of our work, and here's some of the topics that we're going to touch upon. Some of them may have a little more detail than others. You will find that all of our information is available in Google Sites, and that is shared in the publication that Blackboard has created. So you're certainly welcome to utilize and leverage those resources. We've been very fortunate. A couple of other campuses, Cal State Chico and CSU East Bay, were instrumental in helping us kind of create how we were rolling out what we were doing at Fresno State. So here are some of the people that we really have worked closely with, and if you're familiar with the Chancellor's Office for the CSU, again, there's 23 campuses. Brett Christie and his Quality Assurance Program, and there's many others who support his team, have done a lot of work around universal design for learning. And we realized very early on that that's where we wanted our focus to be on this campus rollout. And that it wasn't just about remediation or creating files for subsets of students, that really all students could benefit from the use of multiple formats and multiple representation of content. We also have a number of other partners and collaborators at Fresno State that we work with, specifically Jenny Johnson, who's the director of our services for students with disabilities. And Jenny is instrumental in really providing us with our pilot courses, which had students who primarily had visual impairments as a mechanism to really determine what we were really doing and what was the most effective way for our campus process. And you can also see a number of other partners and collaborators that we have on that slide as well. So what we utilized is called the AdCar model for change management, and if you're familiar with ProSci, that's the company that utilizes that. And so the AdCar model is about building awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and then reinforcing that process. And to do that, we really needed to create some communication plans and get buy-ins. We were very fortunate that we had an executive sponsor with our Vice Provost, Dr. Dennis Neff, and also Dr. Rudy Sanchez, who is our interim AVP for Faculty Affairs. And those individuals really recognized very quickly the power that this tool might provide us, and invested in it initially, and then allowed us to create a pathway forward that really made the most sense. And it's a cyclical model, AdCar is, that we're constantly referring back to as we move forward. We know that, excuse me, faculty desire to have their students succeed, and so we're really tapping on that desire. And in our Center for Faculty Excellence, we built a kind of a culture of trust and collaboration with our faculty, where we bring in faculty experts on a variety of topics and have them share out their experiences with other faculty members. We also have several campus resources that we utilize and continue to utilize as we're rolling this out. And I'm just going to pause there and check to see if we have any questions before I hand this over to Walt Hebron. All right, we'll go ahead and move forward.
All right, so as we continued to consider online accessibility, we started by looking at what files were already online. We used Blackboard as our LMS. And the first thing that hit us, of course, was the sheer magnitude of the number of classes and files. It was just very overwhelming. So the next part of that, of course, then was how do you determine accessibility? So this was pretty important to understand and to try to come up with. So if a student can download a PDF and they can magnify it so that they could read the text, does that make it accessible? We found very quickly there was a lot of education that we had to go through to understand accessibility, and a lot for our faculty. But more importantly, we needed some kind of a tool that would help us to answer, how do you determine and increase accessibility? So we started looking at accessibility checkers. We had just been introduced to Ally, and we wanted to empower our teachers and our students. So we found that by using Ally in conjunction with UDL principles, it accomplished that. A faculty member actually summed up our ultimate goal in this quote: universal design for learning. People learn in different ways, and it is the instructor's responsibility to ensure students are able to access the given course content in multiple formats. And as Bryan said, the faculty, we found, they want to be successful. They want their students to be successful. And by making the content accessible, that was a huge leap ahead to help them do that. So we set up our timeline, our calendar, and this was our implementation schedule. As you can see at the end, we're in phase 4. We're fully implemented. And we worked a lot with a lot of groups. There was a lot of communication that had to occur. The other thing we found that training was just imperative. So we began to incorporate the training into our existing professional development programs like Discover E in our new faculty. And this has made a huge difference.
I'm just going to jump in there quickly. I think one of the value adds to that is faculty are already invested in particular areas of interest, like our Discovery mobile learning program. We've trained over 330 faculty over the past 4 years, and we have approximately 1,400 faculty at Fresno State. So we're doing pretty well, and the purpose of the Discovery program is to really leverage mobile technology, either iPhones or smartphones, tablets or laptops, as part of the teaching and learning pedagogy in the classes. And so if we can do that and also flip the classroom for some of our content with our faculty as we kind of instruct them and give them some ideas of how that might work based on their discipline. And then we ensure that all of that course content is accessible. So faculty do get a modest stipend for participating in a variety of programs that we have on campus. And again, as Walt mentioned, all of our RFPs, our call for proposals for faculty, clearly state in there that creating accessible course materials is one of the requirements. So this includes things like our Discovery program, our Quality Assurance program, which is supplemented and sponsored by our Chancellor's Office, our Affordable Learning Solutions program, which looks at supporting faculty to decrease the cost of course materials, and lastly, our tenure track faculty network, where we spend about 3 weeks onboarding new faculty who've just arrived at Fresno State. And we're very fortunate to have our president support, President Castro, who invest in those faculty with 3 weeks of training prior to the semester beginning. So it's a pretty unique institution, and we know that we have a lot of administrative support, which is why we're being able to be so successful.
So looking at project management, again, the communication was key, and having the support of the campus leaders was paramount. That has helped us tremendously and helped us move forward. We decided to use Trello for the project management, and within this first pilot, we had one instructional designer, myself, and then a student assistant helping, and then kind of part-time student assistants also helping. So it was a very small group to start with. And what we looked at was breaking down files into Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. We did this based on the model from Chico State, which was helpful in looking at this. And then working with our faculty, we wanted to make them aware of accessibility first, and then we wanted to train them on the use of Ally and UDL as part of our main focus. So this is our pilot. So we started in the fall with 17 classes. We really utilized that time to learn about accessibility, learn what remediation was going to take with the different types of files that we had to address. and developing our processes. How are we going to tackle all this mass amount of data? So then we moved into the spring pilot, where we had 43 classes. 11 of those we chose, and then 32 were chosen by our SSD, which was intentionally done so that we could see a future benefit. We were also...
I was just going to chime in. So the faculty that we selected, Center for Faculty Excellence, reached out to were faculty who previously participated in other trainings that we've had on campus, including one of our academic senators who was previously the chair of the Academic Senate. And so we also reached out to and had participation from the chair of what's called our President's Council for Disabilities at Fresno State. And so again, it was finding the right stakeholders and the right faculty members who could also share the story with their colleagues across campus as to what it is we're doing and why it's important. So explaining the why narrative has been really important at Fresno State, just so that we're empowering faculty to make the best choices to be inclusive of all of their students and their students' learning needs.
And also in that spring pilot we were able to incorporate most of the colleges and schools, which was beneficial. And then we went full production in summer, that all classes had Ally activated. So we looked at those 67 classes, which was most of them, not all of them. And we were able to bring that from 50% to 70%. So then looking at our spring pilot, one of the things that we found right off that was kind of a surprise to us was that it's very dynamic. The files increased over that semester from a little over 1,500 files to 2,100 files. So we hadn't really considered that, but it affected how we were going to handle remediation, because there's never an endpoint. It's constantly changing and it's constantly improving, which is what we want on our online classes. We don't want them to be static. So in this pilot, we were able to take these 43 classes from a 30% average accessibility to 77%. And so we found that as a success. We also found that it was important to communicate that we're looking for improvement, not perfection. Some files cannot be made accessible without compromising their meaning and the accessibility for other groups. So that was an important lesson for us to learn, because a lot of the faculty, they want all greens, but we didn't want to bring it down. We wanted improvement. We wanted to make it more accessible, not make it less accessible to other groups.
I think another key point here is that, as we go back to the AdCar models, that point of reinforcement. And so really communicating out to faculty the importance of, once a file has been remediated, we know that they're going to use them perhaps in the future and perhaps in multiple sections of their courses or multiple courses. And so making sure that they're going back and choosing the file that's already been remediated, so they do have an indicator that's green. The second point I would like to add in terms of the dynamic system here is, if you're a faculty member, you know that as faculty members, everything is not ready on the first day of instruction. And if you're a good faculty member, ideally you're modifying your course content based on the needs of your students. And this isn't just online classes. This is online, face-to-face, or blended learning opportunities for students. And so that kind of ongoing dialogue with students and assessment of what it is that you think as a faculty member they need really accounts for the strong increase in the number of files from only about 1,500 almost to 2,200 over the course of this spring pilot. So the faculty support, and again, this goes back to faculty buy-in, access to what it is that they have and the resources they have, and also that notion of trust. So we're very fortunate in the Center for Faculty Excellence. I've been in this role for just over 2.5 years, and we've really built this kind of community of learners who are committed to improving our teaching and learning as part of an overall push to boldly empower our students for success. And the way we do that is we are in a central location on our campus. We are in the library, which has over 10,000 visitors a day. And so we're very fortunate that we are located in the center of campus, and so we do have a lot of faculty contact, and we have a faculty lounge that has essentially opportunities for faculty to collaborate in learning spaces and collaborative spaces. And so we have been very fortunate in that regard that faculty do want to come and see us. The other thing I'll point out is that we have essentially a team of some of the best experts on campus, and there are instructional designers. Walt Hebron is one. We have Sue Yang, Jolynn Blake, and Mary Bennett. And we also have an accessibility support team, including Scott Vang and some student assistants, and then our LMS team with Mike Bach. So we've been very fortunate with that group to really provide an infrastructure of support that was existing that we've just slightly tweaked and modified based on the needs of our faculty. In addition, we do a ton of faculty outreach. So myself and one or more of the instructional designers attends as many department meetings as they will have us in. We have about 52 departments. We've been nearly to half of them this fall, communicating this out about Ally and its important and the importance, and listening to faculty and having conversations with them, because as Walt mentioned, faculty don't want to see red indicators, and so it's a good challenge to have passionate faculty who are invested in this process, because as we empower them, we know that they'll then be able to remediate their own files with the ease of use of Ally and most file formats that we're dealing with. And then they're also educating and becoming advocates for their peers. However, we do know there's a few files that are more challenging to remediate. Here's an overview, and I've spoke about this previously, of the faculty and the training we've done with them thus far. In terms of our classes this semester, you'll see, and I think Walt can talk to, the importance of our training, because the faculty that are trained, you're seeing a much higher percentage by our tenure track faculty on the top graph, that almost 70% of their files in their courses have that green indicator, which is fantastic. I didn't know if you will.
Yeah, and overall, they're starting with an average accessibility of 75% for all the 171 classes here. And that's awesome, because we haven't remediated any of those files. We've trained them, and they're starting with remediated files or accessible files, or they're remediating what they have. And compare that to the chart below, where a much larger group, but the average there is only about 51%. So if we can get faculty to understand the tool and how to use it and how to incorporate UDL, it just makes the content much more accessible from the very beginning, which is really our goal. So one thing that's come up dramatically is, what is accessibility, and what content can be accessible? So there is some content like infographics, which is on the left here, which it's designed to be a visual element. And you can't, nor do you want to, strip it down to a point where you get a green gauge, because you've removed much of the visual elements, or you've removed some of the key components that make it accessible to a different group of students. So what do we do with that? We first have to educate the faculty it's okay to have a red gauge. In some instances, you're going to have a red or an orange gauge, because again, we want improvement. We don't want to go backwards. So instead of eliminating this infographic or stripping it down to the bare text, we can take it to the text key elements and post that document also. So now we have two documents to replace the one, not to replace, but to pair with the single one. And one of them happens to be green, one of them has to be red. But overall, it's much more accessible. Another sample as music notations. So a lot of this is very contextual. It has to do with the learning outcomes the faculty is trying to cover. What are they trying to address? So, is it music notes? Are we trying to teach students to read music here, or are we trying to let them identify the notes? We could throw an audio file in here and replicate the notes in audio, but is that what the intent was? So there's things like this that is very important to work very closely with the faculty to understand what they're doing, what they want. We've also, under this project, we found that there's a accessible music notation project, which is helping to modify sheet music for visually impaired musicians. So if that would accomplish the task, again, it makes it more accessible.
So currently, we're doing some data collection, and we've been fortunate to team with Ally and utilize their survey. We did tweak it and add some components of UDL and self-efficacy of faculty members. We were thrilled that of the nearly 1,300 faculty we emailed the survey to, we used Qualtrics, that to date nearly 400 have completed the pre-survey. So in terms of a response rate, we're really excited about that. And we'll have a post-survey towards the end of the semester. We're also working with one of our faculty experts on qualitative data, who will be doing some focus groups with students and faculty this semester. And we'll be creating a summary of that data so that it guides us as we move forward, and we're intentional about the trainings and types of support that we're providing to all faculty. The other things that we're doing and looking at here is really just identifying how we can support faculty who are part of a tenure track process. If you've been in higher education and you're a faculty member, what you do specifically in your first 6 or so years at an institution really determines if you become tenured and promoted. And so if we can provide letters of recognition to faculty members who've incorporated UDL concepts and have really committed themselves to providing an inclusive learning environment that is accessible, we really feel like that can go a long way when sometimes we don't always have financial incentives to support our faculty. The other thing is the badging, and we have a team of experts. Mary Bennett's on that team, our instructional designer, looking at various badging systems that we might implement. We've been doing badging on campus for several years using Credly, and we're just exploring some other opportunities and what that might look like. But really creating a comprehensive program for faculty member to participate in that has to do with UDL as kind of the overarching umbrella of all the things that we've been talking about today. And we really feel like that communicating that out is much more important than telling faculty, hey, you're doing the wrong thing, your course materials aren't accessible, because faculty become very resistant to those types of conversations. And then lastly, we really think there's going to be some value in looking and doing a deep dive on the data, specifically for the faculty who've been trained on what impact are these course materials having on the grade distribution of their classes, or the DWF failure rates of various courses, specifically in general education and lower division and upper division at Fresno State. So we have a lot to do.
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about faculty, and of course they're absolutely a key player. The bottom line is student success. So as we're gathering this data, we're hoping, and I'm pretty confident, we're going to be able to show that there's huge impact on student success. When they can access faculty content, course content more easily, they can have choices of what they're trying to access. to understand the material, we're going to see impact there. And that's what we're looking for. The bottom line really is student success on all of this.
So we were told we had about a half hour, and we're pretty close to it. And now would like to open it up for any questions, or certainly hear some feedback from anyone who'd like to share maybe some things that we hadn't thought of that we could integrate here at Fresno State.
Thanks, Brian and Walt. Fantastic walkthrough of the work that you've been doing. I'll let others chime in into the chat with any questions or comments that you might have about what Walt and Brian were presenting on. I'm wondering if maybe, as we're waiting for others to chime in on the chat with questions, if you might dive in a little bit more about the training. Here's a question coming in from Krista Greer. What advice would you give to schools who are in a similar position? Your top 3 kind of gold nuggets as far as running a pilot and successfully kind of creating this change management culture.
So the first one I would say is you need executive sponsorship. So you need an administrator who understands the value of this in relation to what we do in higher education, right? Which is all about empowering students to be the best of who they can be, and changing their lives and their trajectory. We have a very high population of first-generation students here at Fresno State, and so the executive sponsors that we've had that have bought into this, it really is our culture at Fresno State. So that's been a relatively easy one. So that would be the first one that I'd recommend.
Another one would be training and the support of the faculty. To go in with a team and try to remediate these files outside of the class, as you might say, is not, I don't think, the way to go. The faculty utilizing Ally as a tool and looking at UDL principles, they're going to make the change. They're going to make it much more dramatic than what another outside team could do.
And then the third one I would say would be the infrastructure. And again, we've been really fortunate that we kind of had an existing infrastructure in place to support faculty professional development. And we've really just leveraged that along with the relationships we currently have on campus with the various stakeholders. And so those would probably be our top 3 just off the top of our heads.
Yep, thank you. Regard with the training piece, I mean, it sounds like that having processes in place and the infrastructure in place to deliver those trainings has been really key, and the culture around professional development. A lot of the universities that I've talked to, they have a really hard time getting faculty, to attend a workshop in person, busy schedules and things like that. Were there particular kind of just pragmatic or logistical strategies that you all were able to create to really help drive that participation and get instructors with very busy schedules involved?
I think partly it hasn't been a new program. It's not like, hey, come and get some accessibility training, because that would go over not at all. But it's been incorporated into professional development that they're already invested in. They want to improve their curriculum. So our Discovery program that helps them integrate technology to tag this on this new tool and talk about accessibility and UDL is a perfect fit. So to be able to do that with existing programs, I think you've already got some of the buy-in there. And it's not say, hey, let's do this new thing over here. It's continue to improve what you do in the classroom to make your students successful.
I'll add on to that too. I think that the value of going to department meetings can't be understated. And so I've been fortunate. I've been at Fresno State basically my entire career. So I've been here, this is my 21st year. And so I've held a lot of faculty roles, including department chair. And if you can get in front of a department chair and their faculty in a meeting, and it's not going to reach all the faculty in their specific department, but you're reaching the faculty who really have influence on maybe that part-time faculty member who needs a little support or assistance, and sharing out at those locations, because you're right, not everyone wants to come to training, but if you can communicate out the message and the simplicity of what it offers as a tool. Even, again, faculty don't want to see red. We've heard that repeatedly as we've gone on our kind of our talking tour to various departments and colleges. And so you get them, and that's just kind of like the hook. You get them, you start reeling them in, and then the next thing you know, they are in the Center for Faculty Excellence meeting one-on-one with one of our instructional design experts to talk about how they can remediate things and how they can improve not only their accessibility of their course content, but also how they can improve their course as a whole so they can do some redesign. And again, if you haven't referenced or utilized the Quolt instrument, I am biased. I can share that, but the QLT rubric I think is a great tool and instrument to help faculty members kind of take a look at what they're offering in their course and what their course pedagogy and teaching and learning pedagogy looks like for students.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Another question that we often get, and it seems like you were pretty strategic in a 4-phase rollout in kind of being able to control the messaging and making sure that instructors were kind of aware of Ally. Before I get to that, Tess at Wentworth is asking, what was the rubric that you just mentioned, Bryan?
It's called the Quolt QLT, and I'll see if I can drop it in the chat real quick.
Great, thank you. And the question that I was getting at there is that a lot of institutions they get worried that that instructors will see the red gauges pop into their course and be surprised and have this moment of resistance. How were able to kind of get messages out, make sure that faculty were aware of this new tool and what its purpose was? And was that through those department meetings that you mentioned? Were there email blasts or things posted in the LMS? What was the strategy for making sure that faculty were aware of Ally and what those red, what the indicators were?
Yeah, so we were very fortunate, again, with our executive sponsor, that we were able to present at our provost leadership team, which has all of our deans and associate deans. And messaging that way, I think, is an important component because the message has to come bottom up from the faculty, but it also needs to come top down. And so the faculty that we hand selected to be invested in our pilot, again, were pretty prominent faculty members on campus who essentially became larger extensions of our team to communicate out those messages, that this isn't a punitive process in any way or demeaning, and no one is making judgments about it, but that we're really just trying to build awareness as to the importance and the why of what we're doing and really lay out a concrete plan for how faculty can be successful.
Right. And as they are more successful, again, their students are more successful, and they want that. I mean, that's a huge motivation for them. And it's a tool that really allows them to do that. I mean, even just the multiple formats that Ally creates that students can use, and this instructor really doesn't have to do anything, is a huge benefit. And students start to see that. In our surveys, we're getting feedback from students that say, hey, why doesn't my instructor have these available for me, and where can I find these kind of things? So again, it also comes down to the students and their success and overall.
Yep. It definitely having access to those alternative formats. Have you used those at all? I know that at Chico State they were using some of the alternative formats to help in remediating content, like using the HTML as a more accessible starting point for remediation. And I know that you guys did some pretty extensive tracking of remediation turnaround times and different types of documents and what that took. And certainly for institutions, when they first look at their institutional report and they see thousands and thousands of documents that need remediation, what did you learn in the process of charting that, and how did that maybe help for you guys in being able to scale up across campus and being able to kind of work through that ticketing system?
Well, I tell you, one of the first things we learned while doing that was that we couldn't do that. There's just too many files. We had to invest in the faculty, and we had to train them, and we had to make them aware of the UDL principles and why that's beneficial. And here's this great tool, Ally, that they can use to help out here. We didn't use the alternative formats as another way to look at files when we are remediating, but we do use them to kind of as a check. So even though we've maybe remediated a PDF file, we'll go into one of the alternative formats that has been created from it to use it as a check to see if we were successful in that. Very cool.
Any other questions as we start to wind down the webinar session? Any questions from the attendees? So Christopher Phillips, you guys can probably see it now, but Christopher Phillips from USU is asking, have you had success in working with faculty to remediate PDF files in particular, which we know can be especially challenging if it's an untagged PDF or things like that?
Yeah, I don't think we're there yet. We haven't done any specific trainings on how to remediate a PDF or how to make it accessible in the beginning. We are encouraging them to use Word docs, and then Ally will create a PDF because actually students prefer the PDF. But we've been working more on some of the easier stuff like the images, PowerPoints, and Word docs. Eventually, we want to do some trainings on PDFs, and actually we've had a couple requests for that.
I'll also add that one of the things we learned early on with some of the PDFs from faculty is that typically those are articles or publications or short narratives that were maybe handed out in their graduate lecture courses when they were getting their doctorates several years ago, and that they've then scanned and rescanned and then uploaded into Blackboard. And so one of the things that we did early on was have conversations with the library team, because at Fresno State, there's a librarian on duty for every hour the library is open. I think our hours are like 8 a.m. to midnight, who is constantly checking email for this type of thing. So we came up with a process where when we ran across those types of PDFs, that we would immediately forward the information to the librarians, who are search experts, to determine if they would be able to find an original or a PDF of the same content that was in original publication or form, and then get that back to us so that we could then utilize that and do the check, Blackboard Ally check on that. And when we are able to get the files back, we've been very fortunate because the indicators do move towards green very rapidly and very quickly.
Or we get a digital copy that's basically HTML, which is much more accessible.
Yeah, it's so interesting because our look at like student downloads of alternative formats, and it sounds like this is the feedback you've gotten as well, that PDF is still the most commonly downloaded format, even though, you know, from our perspective, we kind of are curious about students using the HTML on their phones, and or you know, some of these other formats that tend to be kind of more accessible. Do you have any sense if students are going to that PDF, that tagged PDF format, because it's just familiar to them? Everybody's kind of familiar with the PDF, or is there been any kind of messaging around students in selecting formats that would best fit their device or their particular learning preference or need or in that moment?
Yeah, we're just starting to look at that now from data that we're getting from Blackboard Ally. And it has been interesting the little bit we've gotten so far, because I thought the audio would be much more prevalent, but like you said, it's not. It's a PDF. And we don't have hard data on that yet, but our impression right now is that because it's just more accessible on different platforms.
Very interesting. here. I think we'll start to close it down. I want to give a really big thank you to Walt and Bryan for joining us today and for sharing this work. Again, we're working on a community story with the team, and that should be coming out pretty soon. It's going to kind of go into detail on some of this pilot work that they've done and some of their philosophies on creating a more inclusive culture. They've also been really kind enough to share a lot of the data that they've gathered in these processes. Yeah, so they mention here that those resources will be shared, so you can get some insight into how they tracked remediation times, how they worked with instructors, some of the strategies that Walt has used in his professional development. So we're really just so thankful for you guys taking the time to contribute to the community. And thanks to everybody for joining in on the call today. And hopefully we'll see you next week when we have another group from California, from UC Berkeley, who will be talking about some of their recent work and some interesting technologies that they've been looking at to help with some STEM content, as well as a group of graduate student instructors who are really thinking about inclusive learning from a cultural and sociolinguistic perspective. It's a pretty interesting ways that they're thinking about activities. So with that, everybody, I wish you a great rest of your day, and we'll follow up on the user group with the recording and other relevant information. So cheers, everybody. Thank you.